Hi everyone, welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan Karyappa, and today I'll be speaking to Abhishek Lahiri, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Zolospace, which is India's largest co-living platform. Abhishek comes from the world of finance and was a trader in a former life and has since made the transition to being a fantastic startup operator. We'll talk to him about the transition and his perspectives on executing at a hypergrowth startup on this episode. So without further ado, welcome Abhishek. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Roshan, and thanks for inviting me over. It's completely an honor. And thanks for those kind words too. And yes, I think as you correctly pointed out, the first question that anyone and everyone asked me around is, what kind of transition is this? How did you manage to, coming from a high octane trading floor, trading equities, derivatives, and whatnot, to getting to a very operation heavy, though we are more of a tech heavy company, which is co-living. So I think that's one of the beautiful transitions that I was able to make, of course, thanks to the wonderful people around me, both on both sides, the earlier Deutsche as well as here. And I think if someone has to pick my brain and say which is the best thing that you ever did, I would always say that I miss the trading floor more than anything else in life. But in the same breath, I will also say that this role has given me a lot more than what I would have anyways anticipated the day that I joined. It's very interesting. I had been with Deutsche for around 5 years. And everything is well. It was one of those jobs out of campus that everyone would fight for. And, spending 5 years there, Deutsche had become more like a family. Hong Kong was a great place to stay. Been there for around 2.5, 3 years. Started making those inroads into the place. You know how it is when you move abroad. Right. And from there, came back, decided to take 6 months to a year off for some personal reason, and was back in India, exploring not work for a change. Was home for some time with parents, and then decided to do some soul searching. Went off to the Himalayas, as it's there in the old books. Took a good 20-day trip around the Northeast, and then came back with a fresh mind, and then started deciding, okay, what next? It was at that point of time that I was looking to, go back to the known world of finance that I had looked at that point of time. And it just happened that at one of the social gatherings, I managed to reconnect with an old friend of mine, that's Sneha, a very dear friend, as always, who had been at the helm of Zolo for about a year and a half since its inception. And they had just picked up a Series A at that point of time from the biggies like Nexus. And she was like, we are expanding, and we are looking to expand our leadership team for the next big push that's going to come. Mm-hmm. We had a great chat around it. Of course, if I talk about the business model, it's a no-brainer. Anyone who has been in India knows that there is enough and more demand around it. There is a need for that product. On the other side, with a lot of startups, when you are trying to join them, the first thing that comes to your mind is the information asymmetry that's there. Do I know everything that would decide my future? So I think given that I knew the people, I believed in them and I trusted them. That one factor of trust and that information asymmetry was thrown out of the window. And I would very famously say this to a lot of people around me who have asked this question. Being a trader, I looked at one thing: my risks were hedged. These guys had put in all the hard effort for the past 1.5 years, picked up a good Series A at that point of time, backed by one of the big names in the VC world. So what did I have to lose? And if nothing else, I would get a good perspective. And then at a certain point of time, we can decide as to what next. From that day, that was 2nd of January 2017, it's almost been 3.5, 4 years. and I can only look forward to what else is there rather than look back and say what has happened. So it's been a wonderful journey at that I would say, Roshan. And one of the key things that brought me on board was I had a chat with Nikhil, who's the CEO and one of the co-founders, who said that
who's also from a very unconventional background, right? He's a doctor.
Yes, he's a doctor. He's a doctor from AIMS, and then he practiced for a few years in Singapore before he came back to India. Went to ISB, and now is at the helm of the biggest co-living startup, or I won't even call it the startup company in India. So I think if, for a lack of a better word, a group of misfits trying to their bit in the world, but it's there. So what he told me was, the vision is and what we are looking to do is to change the way people live. If you would have looked at this entire industry, co-living is not something which is new. Co-living is probably there, which existed even during your grandfather's time, and probably even before that, where two or more people would share a room, or would share a flat or share an apartment and live together, split the cost, etc. So co-living per se is not a new thing. Then we would have seen a lot of these hostels or PGs coming up. But what was missing was a great factor in it, which is the customer experience or the satisfaction. Right. 5 years earlier, if you would have walked into one of these PGs or hostels, you would have seen a dirty corridor, an unswept corridor. You would have seen that almost a kind of dial-up connection router dangling from somewhere with almost no great bandwidth given to you. And people are complaining about the food, etc. So what he told was,
it used to be like one of those Anurag Kashyap movie sets, basically.
Definitely. So what we connected best was on not just, there are a lot of ways to make the product, make money, and a lot of ways to, go about your career. And probably the things that we both were doing in our own worlds before Zolo, he a lot before me and me a little after him, would have made us that kind of lifestyle, money, career growth, everything. But what was missing is when you look back after a few years and say that, what have I achieved? What do you answer yourself? And the question that he answered to me was, we will change the way people live, and we will make them realize that they can ask for more. And we will make them realize that there is a much better way to live than what you're currently doing. And that for me was a complete turnaround, that this is something that I want to be a part of, so that when someone says, Abhishek, what have you done and what have you achieved, I would at least go and say that I have tried to be a part of the change as to how people live. Right. And from there we have of course moved ages and eons of course. And we have seen not just our company, we have seen the ecosystem grow. We have seen even the mom and pops that are out there, the erstwhile hostels and PGs, have also understood that customers are the main thing in this business. Today, when you walk into an average or a random accommodation that's not run by one of the consolidated players, you'd see that the standards have gone much better. And I think besides making it big for our own company or our own set of players, what we have also tried to deliver is an upliftment of this entire industry as a whole. And that I think is something that helps us sleep better.
Yeah. So that's, you've given plenty of content for me to sort of unpack. I want to talk about a couple of things in particular, right? So in the world of finance, you're looking at a few indices move, and, it's all about numbers and, very intangible things, right? And then here you are building things out, and it's very operations heavy, as you mentioned, even though technology is a key enabler. So making that switch should have been like a very tactile experience, right? I mean, making that switch between, sitting in front of your desktop and, seeing those indices move to actually going out there, meeting people, trying to understand what's happening, and then actually building something tangible.
Right. So I think the right answer to that would be a yes and a no. Yes, because it definitely is a challenge, and no, because the challenge was any challenge, if well met, doesn't remain to be a challenge, and it just is an opportunity, right? So what helped was, I think, at the helm or at the onset of any challenge thrown at you, the key factor is how much details or how much into the nitty gritty can you go and understand the challenge that is thrown. Once you divide the challenge into smaller parts, once you are able to understand the issues at the ground level, I think there is no challenge big enough that cannot be solved. And especially when you have wonderful colleagues who have been at it, who are passionate, who are who have given it their all, and are there ready to help you across each stage of it. The challenge actually diminishes to quite smaller challenges to overcome and which are easy to cross the hurdles. The other thing which is there is what I also and when I look back at it today, the thing that the trading world gave me were quite significant. It gave me a very data centric approach. Told me that I always I think we were chatting the other day when you also pointed that out, that if there is no data to point out, it's as good as saying your justification, unless that either succeeds or fails. So to have that kind of data-driven approach, that's what trading, or that's what the finance background brings to me. For me, everything has to have a justification. And as we would hear a lot of entrepreneurs or a lot of startups or even businesses, it starts with a gut feel or it starts with an idea. But it cannot remain a gut feel. It has to, at some point of time, the decisions have to be more driven by justified means. And one of the major ways of it is quantitative. And a lot of people also look at a qualitative aspect of it. That is one of the key aspects that I think I also brought on the table, besides a very clear risk management framework. See, we are, and I think today's world is a great example wherein I think a lot of people have started talking about assessing tail risk. And how to incorporate the same in decision making or their models or their business decisions, etc. But any business, for that matter, always has a certain risk, and risk can definitely be categorized into a lot of factors. It can be monetary risk, it can be a reputation risk, legal and compliance, etc. Whenever you are taking a decision, or whenever you are moving into a new unknown field, or whenever you are trying to do something, there is always a risk entailed or that can be ascertained to it. What a lot of people do not do right is they are not looking at, or they are not trying to understand the risk and trying to put it under the rug, saying that, unless we take some risk, how do we go ahead? The whole idea is not to not take risk. The whole idea is to I would look at it from a certain perspective, wherein I would say I divide it into say 4 parts. The first is you have to recognize the risk that you have. Then you would have to quantify the risk that's there that you're dealing with. The next one would be you have to plan for the risk, so that one day that the risk comes or you are faced with that eventuality, you're able to mitigate. Because what happens is, if you're faced with a certain risk scenario and you are not able to think well at that point of time, wherein you have a lot of paucity of time and there are a lot of things going around, you are bound to make an incorrect decision. So it is very important to recognize the risk and plan for it. You may not do anything today, but to recognize and quantify the risk today is also as important. And as the role that I was looking at, which is being the Chief Strategy Officer, one of the key aspects of the role and the responsibility was also to make sure that the risk profiles of all our decisions, etc., is kept not to minimal, but to a certain aspect which is recognizable by everyone. And we are not taking any risk that is not known, so that we are not blindfolded today.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic point that you bring up, because I remember listening to Ram Karaturi, who is, I think, the largest exporter of cut roses in the world, exports food grains and so on and so forth. And he has tens of thousands of acres of land in, Africa, Ethiopia, etc. Right. And, somebody asked him this question that, hey, how did you do that? Right. We know nothing about this place. It seems like such a big risk. And he said, see, before I bought those, 30,000 or 40,000 acres, I bought 1 acre of land and 10 acres of land, right? So he talked about these calibrated risks in terms of building a business. And what you mentioned as well, right, is essentially like have an idea of what you can digest, basically. Have an idea of what you're getting into so that, it's not all unknowns that are like, zooming past you, right? So you have an idea of like what to expect as much as possible. And I think that comes with your background of hedging risks and essentially managing.
It's just more quantifiable there, and it's more qualitative here. And on that note, one of the key principles and in our culture that we have inculcated is the approach of pilot, experiment, and scale. We would always go and pilot. If you're looking at going into a particular city, we would go and pilot. We'll experiment with the product market fit there. We'll try to understand how different things work, and only then look at scaling it up from there, because you don't want to throw good money at the end.
Okay, really sorry for the interruption. I'm just going to take a minute to talk about something amazing. Klogo helps your remote teams be more productive by helping them close decisions more faster. I've worked remotely for the last 4 months, and it's just a lot of going back and forth on Slack, on email, on Zoom, etc., but never really getting to a point of execution, right? Klogo makes things a lot more simpler. You can have communication contextually around decisions that you want to make. All you have to do is open a thread on Slack like this and continue to talk about what you want to do. With a set agenda, it could be your product roadmap, it could be a marketing campaign, it could be a support ticket, etc. And once you're done, it all syncs with your Slack, and you have all of these decisions accessible when you need it, where you need it, right? Guys, I've tried this out and it makes you super productive. If you're even remotely interested, I suggest you go to Klogo.com, that's CLERGO.com, and check it out for yourself. Cheers.
Itself is pretty interesting. I mean, the way it's evolved. So in the 4 years, I mean, you've been chief financial officer, right? Which I guess, I mean, was a no-brainer coming from a background of finance. I mean, all right, chief financial officer. Then you became something called a chief data officer. And then now you're a chief strategy officer. Yeah. Now, all of these are very uncommon in startups, right? Especially at a Series A, Series B type of a level, right? And, strategy is often perceived to be like a 4-letter word in startups, right? I mean, who has the luxury for something like that? So how has your role itself evolved in this time? And what is it that, you do in your current role on a daily basis?
Right. So actually, when I started, I have always been there primarily as a strategy officer, right? And my main deliverable and my main responsibilities were around strategy. And as we look at strategy, it also depends on the life cycle or the maturity of a company that you're in, as you correctly mentioned. And initially, it was more around, making sure that everything is a well-oiled machine. To today, looking at how tomorrow would look like. So there has been a very well demarcated difference between what I was doing earlier and what I'm doing today, and what the entire and how the maturity, and there is a good correlation with how the maturity of the company also is at the other end of it. I'll talk about it, but on the other side, the chief finance officer and data part, I think the data part is also a great part of the entire strategy itself, wherein we as the entire leadership team realized very early that the kind of data that we are sitting on is what is going to make the entire difference and make us a better company and help us serve our customers better in the longer run. And to make sure that, as I said, to be a data-driven organization, was one of the first things that we as the leadership team had inculcated in our DNA. And that's where the data part came very handy. And given that, I always had a good connect with it and always loved, sitting with my Excels and looking at those numbers falling down through the screen, this came very naturally. And we did a lot of good stuff around. And I think we also talked about a lot of these in our previous interaction. May it be supply, demand, or even the way the ops functions are run, etc., where we use a lot of data to understand how things should be or how things could be and how to go on to the next step. From a finance perspective, yes, it came very naturally, but the idea always was to build a certain platform. Because finance is, although is a peripheral function for our industry, which is a ops and tech heavy industry, but it's one of those pillars without which you cannot move ahead well. Things like business finance, which tells you what your right portfolio of products should be, which products are doing well, which are not, how can you increase your CMs and ROEs and ROIs and all those fancy jargons that we have over time, and what to look at and what not, to things as simple as accounting, or having the right accounting standards, making sure that you are ready for tomorrow, what kind of ERPs to use, etc. So the idea was to set the platform, build the foundation, and then pass it on to someone. So I was always acting as a placeholder for someone more senior and someone more with greater experience. And I'm sure that we now have Siddharth at the helm of it, who's managing that with a lot of years of experience and pedigree that he comes from. So I think now I will have better sleep at night knowing that he is there, and a much more astute person than I would ever have been at that role. So it was also part of the strategy function to look at those additional portfolios to make sure that you are able to lay that foundation. And it may not just be finance or data. In the earlier days, we used to make a point. We used to have two very significant things that we used to do. The first one was we always used to go and live in our own properties for a certain period of time to understand what are the issues, to understand what's right, what's wrong. And what we realized, and I think what I realized in the early days was it's very important. We always harp on the fact we do an RCA and find out what is wrong. We do an RCA to look at what's not working, what's the bottleneck, how do we resolve the bottleneck. In that breath, what we are forgetting is there are certain things which are working fine. There are some things which are working better. Why don't we also do an RCA around those things which are working good and try to replicate them across the board and give that benefit to all? So the approach in the initial days was also to, understand, do an RCA for both. Things which are not working and things which are working. Things which are not working, try to make them better. Things which are working, try to replicate them over the entire platform and let everyone reap the benefits out of it. So this is how, the strategy function for me evolved. I'm sorry, I missed the chain of thought there. The first one was living in the property, and the second one was actually working alongside with all different functions. So in the initial days, I think we also had the luxury to rotate ourselves along the senior leadership along every function. So I would have got a good couple of months with demand planning, with sales, with even customer support, and have spent some good time even with generating supply, to where I am right now doing those specific things that I'm expected or responsible for. So that gives you a basic and holistic perspective, because I think strategy, one of the key aspects of it is, of course, to plan, but it is also to implement and monitor. And when you monitor, it requires a very robust feedback mechanism. I'll go back to my engineering days, wherein we used to talk about those feedback mechanisms or the feedback loops of coming on back to the main control system and saying that this is working or not working, and how soon or how agile or how receptive are you to understand those feedbacks and make the changes is what actually at the end of the day determines the efficacy and the efficiency of the plans that you have put through.
Right. So clearly everything that you guys are doing seems to be working, because I can't think of a more like a bigger validation than you guys raising about $56 million at the height of COVID, right? So congrats on the fundraise, by the way. And just walk us through that fundraise. What you guys, how are you looking to deploy that money, and how is the model going to pan out going forward?
See, the whole idea, and I think this is, I always put it, this is more of Nikhil's forte than mine. Put forward that story as beautifully that he does, but I'll just try around. The entire idea at the end of the day is to make managed living the default choice that any person has. If you want to live somewhere, why do you want to go through the hassles of, doing the things that you are not best at? Your prerogative in your life should be living life to its max, doing the things that you want to, pursuing those hobbies that you don't find the time so often for, and leave the rest to us. We will take care of the living part, the managing the living part. So that's I think the vision, and that's where we would want to go down the path towards, wherein we would want to incorporate all aspects that would help anyone to be able to spend quality time living their life rather than managing it. So that's the idea. That endeavor, I think a lot of this money would go towards, getting the right kind of talent, the right kind of properties or supply, and also preparing for the future that we want to create for tomorrow. A lot of things would always be an incremental from what you have today. Things like how to make lives of our tenants or customers better through, say, IoT, or how to use data better to be able to serve them well, how to upgrade properties in a certain way that talks about more about personalization, etc. But at the same time, how to be those industry leaders who are able to also introduce those new aspects that people have not heard of.
Right. So, the other thing is that we're living in the current times of COVID, where literally every industry has been impacted, right? And just talk us through how your particular industry, which is the co-living space, has been impacted, and what are you doing to adapt to this change?
So I think it's one of those unfortunate times that we all have to live in. I think there is no doubt around it. But given the fact that living or accommodation is more or less a necessity rather than a luxury spend, the kind of impact that we have seen is definitely much lesser than a lot of other unfortunate sectors, say travel,
fashion, retail,
etc. So in those terms, I think we definitely are lucky. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, one of the key pillars that I talked about is customer satisfaction. And the company as a whole has one of the greatest NPSs across this entire industry. So what that tells us is people are happy living with us, and they trust us on a lot of factors. And that trust is something that came in very handy for us during these times where we were seeing that people are worried as to the place that we are living in. People are worried as to what kind of hygiene conditions are there, how the food is cooked, is it safe, is it contactless, and all those things. Our customers did not have to worry from the onset of it, because we were able to adapt very quickly to these changing times and make sure that our service levels, our service offerings also changed in that order to be able to cater to our customers at the best in the as per the need of the current hour. And in fact, we have also gone ahead. I think it was announced by a CEO a couple of weeks back, wherein we also want to support the people who have unfortunately lost their jobs. Because see, it's not about the money that you make today. It's not about the utilization that you have today. It's a longer game. It's a much longer game. It's all about doing the right things so that people believe in you, trust you, and there is no reason for people to go out of this ecosystem. We are trying to also connecting to the previous question that you had put through. We are trying to build an ecosystem. We are trying to build a huge ecosystem where people don't have the need to go out of tomorrow, and that's precisely what we are trying to achieve even in these times by upgrading our services, by upgrading our processes for that matter. And in fact, what we realized is in terms of our, if I just take one example of our housekeeping that was done, we always used to use, industry grade chemicals for disinfectants, which now people are getting into a habit of using to keep their places hygienic and germ-free and virus-free, as they call it. So we have been doing that for long. We have a very strict protocol as to how the cleanliness factors in a particular property are to be maintained. So very honestly, it's not that we had to reinvent or we had to invent something totally afresh. We had to just keep doing the things that we are doing, and people were happy around it. Right. In terms of how this would play for this sector per se, I think what we have seen is there would be a lot of migration from the current accommodations that people are living in to more managed and to more hygienic places like one of ours. Because what people have started understanding is even if there is a premium attached, and by the way, that premium is not something unaffordable at most places, and some places there might not even be a great premium that is required of the customer, to come and live and be, forget about their hassles and woes about this entire COVID situation.
Right.
See, no one can guarantee you today, even you living in your own house, that you would not contract the disease. But there is always a risk or a probability that is attached to all your actions. I think people realize the fact that, moving into, say, a Zolo property increases their chance of being healthy and showing up or doing work regularly whenever they want to and living their life to the fullest. So I started seeing this shift, and that shift has happened and would be happening on two fronts. One is on the individual front, where the individuals themselves are taking those steps, looking for better accommodation, better hygiene, better food facilities, etc. And on the side of the companies who are hiring them. And if I divide the companies into, say, two different aspects, say the smaller ones with say 50 to 100 people employed, to bigger corporations with thousands of employees. The smaller corporations are at a great risk because if, say, 2 or 3 people are contracting this disease, they have a risk of that being spread to almost everyone, right? And that typically entails that you would have a loss of revenue because everyone would be self-quarantined or home quarantined. God forbid, no one is hospitalized, and there would be a definite sense of loss of revenue, loss of productivity, which no one wants. Right. So it is also in their favor, and we have seen a lot of queries around it where the smaller companies are reaching out to us and saying that these are the people, can you help them with accommodation which is top notch as per your standards, because we want them to be safe. Right. On the other side, the bigger corporations, it's more of a reputational risk. Reputation risk in terms of not that it's a bad thing for someone to contract the disease. It's not. But are you able to service your customer or your client the fullest? And what are the steps that you are taking so that, that continuity in business remains top notch is what they are also looking at. And in that, the accommodation, the kind of accommodation that they can help their employees with also comes to the forefront.
Right. So the other thing is that the Zolostays business model is premised on a larger trend of sharing economy, right? I mean, where people are choosing not to own these assets like, homes or cars or whatever, and prefer to share these assets and rather invest in experiences, right? And I'm talking about people, maybe millennials, Gen Zs, and so on and so forth. So do you see that as a strong enough trend, and do you see that kind of sustaining even post COVID and stuff?
See, I think there would be a good reason for it to sustain, because if I look at the math of it, if I look at the math of owning a house, I don't own a house because it doesn't make sense to me, right? If I would probably choose, given the mobility. See, one other aspect of owning the house also comes to whether you want to live or you want to invest. I think from an investment perspective, there are certain pockets, there are certain investments that would always make sense. And that's how the real estate industry will grow. Yeah. What we're talking more about is, do you buy to live? Yeah. Now, in today's world, especially the millennials or most of us are more mobile than ever, right? I have not stayed in a particular city for more than 3 years in the last decade or more, right? So if I buy a house in Bangalore, what do I do with it when I want to move out?
You're tethered to it.
So it's a deterrence. It's a kind of deterrence. It keeps me back. It holds me back. I still remember when I came back from Hong Kong, I just packed up my suitcase and rest everything was packed by the packers and sent over to me, shipped over to me in the next 2 weeks, and I did not have to even bother about it. That's how mobile our lifestyle are these days. So the other thing is, as we all now believe, and there is a big pivot. I think shared economy is just a certain aspect of it, but the big pivot is experiential living or experiences that superior experiences that you get out of a lot of different products. For example, if I had to talk about experiences, I think Airbnb is the best example that comes to me. Yeah, everyone used to go and find a hotel to live in, to spend their time while they were roaming around. What Airbnb said was, why not experience the idea of living with a local when you're there? Live like a local and experience it like a local. Talk to them, eat with them, spend time with them. And every one of us, no one thought about it. But the day we started doing it, I think I would not have stayed in a hotel for the last 5-6 years, or at least a few trips that I have gone to, and I travel a lot. So from that perspective, experience is what is coming to the forefront. So if you are able to augment that experience, and if you are able to showcase the benefit of a certain product that would enhance your experience, there are a lot of takers, and that's actually the trend that is going to hold and is there currently. It may not just be the sharing economy, which is more on an economical aspect of it.
Right. So let's switch things up a little bit, and we'll do what we call a rapid fire round. Right? Short and interesting answers to the following questions.
I have always been bad at that, so yeah.
No, don't worry, you're doing just fine. So, your morning routine.
Wake up, more news, stock market, work.
Of course, right?
Yeah.
Best thing about your job?
The challenge that it poses every day, and the sweetness of the success at the end of it.
So no 2 days are the same?
No. It would be very boring otherwise.
Of course. The not so nice thing about your job?
I still have to find them.
Okay. That's nice. One thing, I think we've spoken about this, but anyway, one thing finance folks should learn from startups.
I think the idea about following your being ready to take that chaos in.
Managing ambiguity.
Sorry?
Managing ambiguity, basically.
Yes. Right. We are we are more so trading is a little different, but more so finance is more about being more organized and more planned and meticulous.
Right. So none of that, jump and then build a parachute along the way kinds.
Yeah, no, not that.
So
I'm still learning around it.
one thing that startup folks should learn from finance people.
Risk management.
Yeah, of course. So the best quarantine hack that you've discovered over the last 3-4 months?
Oh, I got a nice. I was so tired of mopping and sweeping my house. I got one of those nice robots.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm actually looking for options around that. I mean, we should connect later.
We should definitely connect separately around it.
But it does the job?
Sorry?
It does the job?
Oh, it does wonderfully.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Right. I know you read a lot. So what books do you read generally, and what are you reading right now? What's on your table right now?
So I actually, for quite some time, have not read a book per se. I have actually started reading a lot of these blogs and small snippets. And this COVID time has turned my attention more towards, UI UX designs. So I was reading more around that and getting the idea. And one of good articles that I was reading today was more around how logos are designed and how the golden ratio and the Fibonacci plays a good role. So very abstract reading. I can't put my finger on it and say this is what I read.
No, but that's interesting though. That's really interesting. Are you a big podcast person? I mean, do you listen to a lot of podcasts?
I do. I won't say a big podcast person, but the good ones that I keep getting at, I am a history buff. So I just, the last one that I was hearing was more around that the Byzantine Empire. So, yeah, so all over the place in terms of reading and listening and seeing.
Yeah, there's plenty of good history podcasts. Actually, I'm failing to recall the name of this. Wait, let me see if I can check that out. Shucks, I can't seem to find it. I'll let you know. There's this really famous history podcast, perhaps the most famous one out there. I'll probably send you a few episodes. I quite enjoyed them as well. And hopefully you listen to the Startup Operator as well going forward.
Of course. I did go through the last two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
I was a little new entrant to it. Now I think it would be a regular.
Right. So this has been a fascinating episode. I mean, tons of things to learn specifically on, how strategy can apply for startups, right? And about the co-living space and the shared economy as such. I want to end with, your words of advice to people who are executing at a rather difficult time, right? I mean, as we mentioned, there have been industries which have been hit really hard. How do you, put your head down and still give it your all every day? And any words of advice to startup operators?
I think the most important part is to be positive and to believe in your own words that this shall pass too. I think that's the key. Unless you believe that this will pass and unless you are positive in the entire path of it, no matter what comes your way. But at the same time, it is also very important to have your contingencies ready. It is very important to be pragmatic and be rational about what you're doing. It would serve no good to anyone if you are just blindly optimistic and tomorrow you realize that your optimism was just too high. So it's always good to be positive, but also necessary to be pragmatic. And the way to be pragmatic is make your plans, make very meticulous and detailed plans. Because today, how things are changing, they are changing on a weekly basis. Your AOPs and QOPs will have already gone out of the window. Start realizing those plans at least at a weekly basis. Once you do that, start making contingencies. Have not just a plan B, have a plan C or a plan D, because we have seen, and I have spoken to a lot of my friends and colleagues across industries, most of them are looking at the plan D and E today, because these are so uncertain times that you never know what is going to hit you tomorrow.
Yeah.
So plan well and plan those contingencies. And I think those would be my 2 cents around things.
So I think one of my favorite stories about this, what you just mentioned, is about Airbnb in 2008 or 2009. I think there's this fantastic story of Brian Chesky, the founder, having maxed out all of his credit cards and being sort of in debt. And they realize, they have to do something drastic to keep things afloat. And it's also the election year, so they start selling the cornflakes, right? Branded cornflakes. And I think they made about 150K from that, which kind of helped them.
It's a famous one these days.
So if Airbnb can pivot to selling cornflakes for a while, then I think you can, figure what plan you should do, right? Yeah,
exactly.
So thank you so much, Abhishek. This has been fun. We should definitely do a follow-up sometime, and I'd love to know more about what plans you have in the future as well. Yeah.
Sure, Roshan, it was a pleasure and an honor to be on the show.
Thanks so much. Thank you, guys. Thanks so much for listening in. This podcast will be available on Anchor.fm, Apple, Google Podcasts, and a bunch of other platforms. If you like this episode, then don't forget to share and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe and take care.